This is Martha Cole, and we're thrilled to welcome you again to the Teaching Montana History online PLC. And I'm going to turn things, today we're going to focus on beyond the textbook, activities and lessons that bring Montana history alive. So if you are listening to this as a recording, we've put the link to the Google Doc in the chat, and if you just pause a minute and go to that Google Doc and spend 5 minutes thinking about this topic, answering the prompt there, and then coming back, that would be great. All right, and here we are. It's Martha Cole and Christy, who I think is also here as your hosts. You know, and the basis of this longer course has been the Montana Stories of the Land textbook. It's kind of focused on teaching Montana history, but I think we all know that as great as a textbook is, and we think it's a great textbook, it's important to move outside the bindings of that book. And, you know, kids have a hard time reading textbooks. I have a hard time reading textbooks. And the textbook is the starting point, not the ending point. And it's not what is going to really enliven and engage your students. So, and as we said, there's the Google Doc that is in the chat address where we're asking you to think about your most successful Montana history lessons and describe how it meets your big picture goals, and the lesson that's not part of the textbook, you know, not. We have Tammy Gardner here, and she wrote some really interesting things in that Google Doc about working with her students on Sweetgrass Basket, I think, and some of the stuff she wrote made me think that there's different ways to bring history alive, and one of them is surely literature connection. So I don't know, Tammy, if you want to describe that unit at all.
Yeah, well, because I'm just starting it this year I just started it last week, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. But I based it on, there's a unit on OPI for teaching Sweetgrass Basket, and I think it's a ELA unit. And I am using it in our English class, but I do English and history together. So anyway, we start off reading some articles and building background knowledge on boarding schools, and then we read through Sweetgrass Basket, and we watch a movie called Rabbit Food Fence, which is the Australian version of our boarding school, and it's a great movie. It's very similar to Sweetgrass Basket. Girls get sent to boarding schools, they run away, and basically what happens to them. It's a very powerful movie, a very powerful book. And then a couple of years ago, we had Dottie Susag come in, and she did a couple lessons on poetry, and we used some of the poems from the Birthright Born to Poetry collection, and they are very deep and difficult poems to analyze because they're about abuse. But she gave me the courage to use those in the classroom, and I think it's probably the most powerful unit that I do all year. That's kind of just basically what I do.
And I was really taken with this idea of I've talked to other teachers too who talk about literature connections and having like a touchstone book to do a history, to jump off into like a history unit as being a really powerful way to engage your students' imaginations and interest. And I'm guessing that's partly what you're finding is the kind of imaginative literature allowing them to a doorway into harder history.
Yeah, very much so. And then so we read Hattie Big Sky for learning about kind of the homesteading era, and we've read Joseph Medicine Crow's biography for just kind of an introduction to the whole Native American community. And so yeah, I think the literature is, if they're going to remember something, it's going to be the literature.
Yeah, and I've seen other teachers, well, I know we have a lesson kind of unit on Girl from the Gulches, the story of Mary Ronan, which talks about what it's like to be a kid in the mining camps. And there's someone that and I'm blocking on the name of the book now, but it's a Klondike Gold Rush, so it's not a Montana Gold Rush story, but that's pretty powerful kind of imaginative entry into that world too. You know, and the literature connections makes a lot of sense to me, and so does just this idea that I think you also kind of touched on in your, in some of the things that you've told me about kind of just finding the right primary source, and that those those primary sources can really bring history alive also to students in a way that like a textbook description can't.
Yep.
Do you find that with your kids too?
Oh, very much so. You know, I'm moving more and more away from the book and more towards primary sources and informational text and literature, because I think that's where it really comes alive. You know, and even like the poetry in the Birthright collection, anything that will really grab their attention and make them kind of dig in and want to know more.
You know, I'm hoping folks know by now that at our website, mhs.mt.gov/education, we have a lot of lesson plans that are primary source based. This is a picture here. This is a winter count that comes from our pictographic art, one of our pictographic art lesson plans. I love this as for a primary source, and we include this in one of our hands-on history footlockers. And what I love about this is just, you know, you hear about all of the people who come to Butte and how it's this really polyglot mining community with people, immigrants from all over the world, but the fact that they have this sign that says no smoking in all of these different languages, you know, that they would have to post outside the mine entrance because they couldn't count on people being able to read English, sort of brings that home in that really powerful way, I think. I think there's some trouble like finding the right source that, you know, you can, I tend to want to overload kids with sources, or, you know, I'm a historian, you know, and finding that one really strong source that piques their curiosity, you know, I think can be hard, can't it?
It can, and you know, I try to use the letters that go along with the units in the textbook, and those are usually okay. But again, yeah, some of those are kind of, it's hard to find something that's really going to grab them. And
so you're saying that some of the letters work and some of them don't work so much?
Yeah, I think they're all powerful, but some of them are more powerful than others. And if you use too many, I think kids just get into this routine of analyzing them and like blah blah blah, just analyzing them. But so using them correctly too, I think, is important. How does it relate to the chapter, and how does it relate to what we're learning?
Well, and I think that, Tammy, if I can just jump in a little, I just feel like that's sort of a great discussion of voice for when you're talking about the English language arts, and you know, why is this one striking us more than another one? Is it maybe the voice of the person who's writing that, or where that's coming from, or you know, or is it just the content and we don't connect to it as much? So I just think that's a kind of a powerful segue into understanding why some speak to us more than others, or something like that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So I was thinking that there are other things too that, you know, so my immediate thought actually went to like finding the right primary source as how to bring history alive. But I also, you know, started thinking more, and setting the mood would be another thing that I think, you know, beyond the written word. So one thing to do is to use music. I know the American Jukebox is this pretty amazing site on the Library of Congress has, and they have here, I'm gonna show you this little, you know, songs. They give this historical warning. They can contain offensive language, which they certainly can.
Wow.
All right, that's probably enough of that. But, you know, they have World War I songs, they have World War II songs, they have, some fun, like, temperance songs. So just kind of, you know, what was it like to live at that time? You know, part of that is what music were we listening to and singing? What was on the radio? One of my favorite kind of websites is Tar's Toolbox. He's this British historian. He actually works at an international school in Toulouse, and he uses Spotify. He does subject theme Spotify lists to intrigue his class, and he talks about how to do that on his website. So here's a sample of some of the stuff that he's done. You know, he has something on witchcraft, on Jack the Ripper, on the American Civil War. Anyway.
So is that music that's Spotify, is that music that goes with it?
Yeah. So Spotify is an online streaming source. It's all the
Okay.
rage with the kids. I only know about it because I have a 22-year-old son, but it's basically you set up your own radio station.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, so just as kids walk in, you're starting a new unit on the Great Depression. Maybe they walk in and you're listening to Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? As you settle down. I mean, just a little kind of touch of the world at that time. Objects, I think, are really powerful too. I think it's, we have these hands-on history footlockers. I've talked about them a lot before. Here's the link. There are all sorts of themes coming to Montana. That is where these pictures are from. Well, one of them is from East Meets West. We have one on boarding schools. We have lesson plans with all of these, but I think a lot of teachers just get the footlockers so that they have access to the objects because they resonate. Holding, just something really simple like a flour sifter. What is this? What do you think people use that for? What does this tell us about everyday life? Again, just to get people into that place and transport them back into time, I think can be a powerful tool. Jody Delaney has a whole program, things she does on becoming your own speaker. And she does first-person interpretation. And so she'll spend 5 minutes at the beginning of a class, as a character. In this case, it's a Rosie the Riveter character when she's introducing her kids to World War II. And, so she'll dress up, and she's extreme. I mean, she's a great seamstress, and she's done these amazing, dresses to become Mrs. Daly, for example. But she said, you can do it with something as simple as a kerchief and pretend to be an immigrant coming over, or, to tie your hair back and a work shirt. It doesn't have to be complicated, she says, and talking to the kids in first person, if you have that kind of dramatic flair, she says is super powerful into bringing kids. I'm not sure I could pull it off.
Yeah.
But I love that she pulls it off. And yeah. Food is, again, another kind of way in. Several teachers have told me that after reading Chapter 8, which is the open range chapter, they do a cowboy beans cook-off, where the kids compete and they cook cowboy beans in crock pots in the classroom, and then they have a tasting session and whose is the best. But again, and I'm a kind of serious person, so I'm always like, oh, is this wasting time? But I actually don't think it's wasting time. I think it's what the kids remember, so I'm always like, let's read more text. But in fact, I think it's important to open your class up for a little levity, and I think stuff that really is, they're going to think back, kids talk about this. And then I think they use this to tie other information to, it becomes a touchstone.
Yeah.
I think too, Martha, that it's part of that human connection to learning. And especially when we're talking about history, when we're talking about social studies, the more we make that connection to the human beings, the more open window that those students have on the world. So I just think that that's wonderful, and paying attention to the way that we interact with our world, and we can recreate that in the classroom in these ways. So I would love to come to a cowboy bean cook-off in a classroom anytime. That would be fantastic.
I know that a teacher in Three Forks does it, a teacher in Butte does it, so apparently it's a thing. Games. One of these, and again, I'm always a little skeptical, is this, are they going to learn enough to make the time worth it? But I think, in fact, if it's well designed, they do. So this is, again, Tar's toolbox, and he does a Google Maps online scavenger hunt, and he has a little template so you can code it yourself to have a treasure hunt where you can collect gold coins by finding, the answers to questions, so what was the first Montana state capital or territorial capital? what was the first Montana territorial capital, and you have to go to Google Map, and you can click on Bannock and you can find it, that kind of thing. And he uses it as a review tool, to review the chapter, or as an introductory tool to have them try to figure things out. And then Mission US is a really interesting, kind of more sophisticated game site. They've done a whole bunch of kind of history games, including the Cheyenne Odyssey one, that they work pretty closely with the Northern Cheyenne. It's 1866, Your Little Fox, Can You Help Your Tribe Survive Life on the Plains? It's a pretty interesting model, I think. And they've been doing it for different periods. So they've gotten up as far as Dust Bowl in their Mission 5. This is Mission 3. One thing I forgot to put on here, we'll talk about History Day in a minute. When I was thinking about ways to really bring it alive and beyond the textbook, I think you can't forget beyond the school walls, and well-designed field trips have tremendous power, I think. And well-designed is really a key aspect of that. So not just going somewhere to go somewhere, but thinking about it in terms of how it fits into your lessons and doing pre and post lesson stuff on it. But man, going to a buffalo jump and seeing what that really feels like and looks like, you can't beat it for kind of gaining an understanding, I think.
The mine in Butte, the underground mine in Butte, has a wonderful tour, but they're only open like September and May, so it doesn't ever really fit in with the mining unit, but it is well worth going to.
Yeah, that's an amazing experience when you go down there and they turn out the lights, and you're in the dark and you start thinking about the speculator mine disaster. It's it's a pretty powerful thing. Or I can't go, they have the Granite Mountain Overlook Speculator Mine Memorial in Butte, and I cry every time I go to that site, maybe because I'm sentimental that way, I don't know. Another way to get beyond the textbook and maybe really engage students, I think, is inquiry models. I think I talked in an earlier session of this class about National History Day, but having students find a topic that they're interested in researching, something that speaks to them, because they like sports, so they're interested in the 1904 women's basketball team from Montana that became the world champions, or, they're interested in fashion or whatever, but having them be something that they're interested in and then being able to do independent research and create something new, I think is pretty powerful. And on this slide there are links to various websites dealing with National History Day. But there are other ways to do inquiry that's a little shorter and more guided. History Labs is a really good model. They have a template of how they set up their inquiry units that I find useful. I think as a teacher, these are hard to create yourself because it's time consuming. It's time consuming to find those right resources. It's hard to find that open-ended overarching question that permits multiple answers. It can just be tough to create maybe a summer project to create one, and then the next summer you create another one. Stanford History Education Group, which I love, they have a whole bunch of kind of inquiry units that are national history units. History Labs has national ones too, but I know that SHEG has lesson plans on Lewis and Clark, Manifest Destiny, Battle of the Little Bighorn, for example. We took the History Lab model to do our Hazel Hunkins Billing Suffragist unit. And so we use that, and kind of the overarching question is, does she belong in the textbook? And having them look at suffrage and her role in gaining women's suffrage to make that decision. And then another one that we've done that's also really inquiry-based, in the truest sense of the word, is this Women in Sports Tracking Change Over Time unit, because it has students researching their own communities. It has them doing a brief survey on participation in sports and then analyzing that data to see how Title IX did or did not make a difference in their own community, and comparing their community data with state data and with national trends. So, you know, real history and done in a way that's quite simple. Well, I don't know, quite simple to execute, but not too onerous, I think. We hope. So just some ideas, you know, and there's always that balance, of course, between the amount of time you have to spend and, you know, depth versus breadth, which is always a tough thing. But where you can put in inquiry, I think it is well worth it. So that was a quick talk. I don't know if anyone has anything to add before we sign off.
Well, we've been keeping track of all the links that we've been sharing, and those will be part of the recording. I'll make sure that those are an overlay over the slides for those who are watching the recording. This is just such an incredible opportunity to learn about the real and authentic resources that are that much more engaging for students and that are going to make the ideas that we need to learn, whether we're talking about the specific standards for social studies and history and English language arts. But, you know, beyond that, it's about the real learning that students need in order to understand the world around them. So I just think this is really exciting that we have such a wealth of resources to share, and definitely enroll in the Teaching Montana History online PLC course on the Teacher Learning Hub. We're really appreciative for those who are joining us through that medium as well.
And I guess I just want to end with two other thoughts. One is guest speakers, obviously, was something that I sort of missed, that I saw as a lack when I went through these slides. But if you can bring in a miner or bring in a rancher or, you know, bring in someone who fought in Vietnam or, you know, whatever it is, that makes a huge difference to students. And that I really do think that as we focus on standards, which are tremendously important, it's equally important to kind of, you know, take a breath and kind of hook the kids, you know. I think one of the reasons I became a historian was because my 10th grade teacher had been a nun in a very strict order. She was Sisters of the Precious Blood, and it was an order that hadn't changed the way they did things since the Middle Ages. And so when we were studying medieval history, she walked us through her day as a novitiate, and really made me be able to imagine what it would have been like to be a French nun in, you know, the 1400s, which is when her order was founded. And you know, I'm not sure what standard that ties to, but it's powerful, you know. And then we also did a lot of really academic work in her class too. But there's power in stories and in these, you know, music and in these other intangible things.
Thanks for joining us.